So hello everybody, good morning. My name is Dr. Andres Fonseca. I'm CEO and founder of Thrive, and I'm also a consultant psychiatrist. We're doing a seminar today on CBT and what it is and how it works and what is the use of it and all of those questions. So with me I have Johanna Schetzer, who's one of our business psychologists. You want to say hello and say anything?
Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. So if you have any question during the webinar, I'm happy to keep an eye on the Q&A function and stop us from talking and answer your question as much as possible. But if we don't answer your question during the webinar, we will come to them in the end of the session. So feel free to write them whenever they come up.
Yeah. It should last for about 45 minutes, depending on questions and how it all runs. And then, yes, we have time for questions at the end. So we wanted to talk to you about CBT. So I think everybody has heard of it, but maybe not very many people fully understand what it is. We also have some polls that we will be putting to the audience at different times. So Johanna, you have to sort of remind me where they go. Yeah.
Maybe we start actually with the first one right now.
Let's do that, yeah.
Introduction. You have to control them because only the main host can do that.
Okay, let me see how that works. So if I do this, very simple. Let's see what people think. Well, the question is it only used for treatment? Or can it be used for other things as well?
All right. Really good, nice.
Yeah, so I think, let me see, we'll end it there. And the great majority thinks it's also effective for prevention as it is for treatment. In fact, it seems to be a little bit more effective for prevention than it is for treatment, interestingly enough. So one of its main advantages is prevention and relapse prevention. So there we go. So the first question that perhaps we want to answer is what is it? So, as I said, most people will be familiar with it, but I mean, and most people, when I ask this question, I don't know if we have do we have the putting your hand up function enabled? Yes, I think we do. So if anybody wants to sort of come in and give me an answer for what CBT is, then that would be great. We'll enable them to talk. I think that's possible. You know, there's a function to put your hand up if you want to sort of come in and comment on any of the things that we're saying, and we can enable you to talk to everybody as well. So, so yeah, if anybody wants to come in and give me their answer.
There's one response, challenging your thoughts.
Yeah, that's a component. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that is the area that most people will go for. Somebody raised their hand. Let me see if we can enable them to talk. Oh, I can't see the raised hand. Is it somebody on their phone? Can't see it. Anyway, so thoughts is the first thing that people sort of think of when they're thinking of CBT. But it's also got a B in it, which is behavior. So it's got a behavioral component. That's important to think about as well. In fact, the behavioral component is extremely important for a successful learning of the skill and using the skill effectively. So it involves thoughts and it involves behavior. Those are the two components. But basically, the main question, the main answer is. It's a form of therapy. It's a form of psychotherapy. So we've got is the way you control your mind is another answer. Consciously intercepting your subconscious thoughts. Those are all definite components of it. But in general, it tends to be seen. The answer is that it is a form of psychotherapy. Yeah. So what does that mean? So basically, it's a non-pharmacological intervention when it was first designed, non-pharmacological intervention for various mental health conditions. And its original design was around depression. It was targeting depression specifically. So it was developed because the other form of prevalent psychotherapy at the time, which was the psychodynamic form of psychotherapy that had been proposed by Freud, among many other people, turns out that it didn't have a solid evidence base. Then Dr. Aaron Beck sort of found that out and decided to try and develop a form of psychotherapy that had an evidence component. So trying to do an experimental intervention with it. In the same way, what he was thinking is, in the same way we have other treatments that require a clinical trial and evidence, we should require the same thing from a psychological intervention. So it's a non-pharmacological intervention in the form of and it takes the form of a conversation, but it's got more to it than just a conversation between a therapist and somebody who's receiving the therapy. So it's got a few components that distinguish it from other forms of psychotherapy. It's focused on the here and now. That's one of the key components. So it starts off by looking at what is happening now. Doesn't mean that you're always focused on what's happening now. You know, what's happened before, your own experiences, explain some of those thoughts, some of those subconscious thoughts that people were talking about earlier. So that is important to explore in the course of therapy. But you always start from the here and now, and what are the current difficulties, what are the current problems, and how we're going to deal with them. It's very focused on that. It proposes a particular model of how the mind works. So we'll see that later on. But if you think of the one that was there before CBT was developed, the model of the mind was, there was this id, this ego, and this superego. Most people would have heard of that. When CBT is introduced, there's a new model that tries to explain what is going on, and is like part and parcel. So it's got its own specific way of understanding how the mind works, and it does not include this id, ego, superego at all. It's a new way of thinking about it. Now, one of the key characteristics that nobody mentioned, but is very, very important. So it's not just about what happens during a session, but it's about what you do between sessions. And actually, that's very important. If for it to be successful, that needs to happen. You need to sort of do that work between sessions. So it's got this homework. I know people hate the word, but it is what it is, and is actually the most important component to make it effective. So people who just attend the sessions compared to people who complete the homework, the rate of success with it is very, very different. So it's a very important component of it, and there's a reason why this is, and there's a reason why it's like homework, because what you're doing really here is you are learning a skill. And to learn a skill is not just enough to go and see the person that's teaching you. You need to practice it between sessions. So in the same way that if you go to sort of driving lessons, you need to practice at home, or when you were learning to write or read, you were practicing at home, or when anything that you do requires some training on the part of perhaps somebody who's an expert in the technique, like a piano teacher, for example. But just by going to the piano lessons, you're not going to learn the skill. It requires that practice in between sessions. That's very different, perhaps in CBT compared to others. And it is collaborative. It's not that the therapist is like the expert and has all the answers and is going to give you these wonderful interpretations, and that's going to be how this works. No. It's about a collaboration between the person who's receiving the therapy and the person who's enabling the therapy. So the therapist doesn't have all the answers. The answers, the role of the therapist is to facilitate the journey of the person who actually discovers what are the answers, what are the right answers for them. This is very important. And it has this problem-solving approach. So it concerns itself with things that are actually having an impact and whether we can do something about that. So we can change that, and if we cannot change them, how can we cope with them better, live with them better, deal with them better in a way that is that enables the person to achieve their goals and feel the way they should feel. So how does it work? It's all about gaining this skill. And my pitch to you is that skills are kind of like special powers. So going back to my earlier example about the piano playing, if you don't know how to play the piano and you watch somebody play it, we've all had this experience, it's kind of mysterious how they do it. You know, if you try to do it, you know, you don't know how they're doing it. You know, they're using both of their hands at the same time without even thinking. It looks very easy when they do it. It's kind of almost magical, okay? And it requires a lot of practice, hard work, and it's very hard at first when you're gaining a skill. You make a lot of mistakes. You know, you've all had this experience whenever, you know, I remember learning to drive, for example, that's one, or even learning to write or read when we were little. Initially, very, very hard to do. Now you go to work when you're in your car and you don't even realize that what journey you've taken. You've been thinking of other things while your brain has been automatically taking you there without even you realizing. So it requires practice, and even though it's hard at the beginning, it becomes very easy once you've done that practice. Now the good news is that learning this skill is much, much easier than learning how to play the piano or learning how to read and write or learning any other skills, and it's extremely powerful. So even though it's perhaps, I'm not saying it's easy, but it's perhaps easier to acquire than some of the other skills that I've been talking about and requires less practice, it's still quite a very powerful skill to actually have. So, oops, I didn't mean to do that. Let me see. Yep, there we go. So this is the model that I was talking about when I was talking about how CBT conceptualizes the mind. So it's the mind as an embodied quality. So in other forms of psychotherapy, the mind is kind of very isolated from the rest of you, from the rest of the body. Whereas in the CBT way of seeing the world, it kind of integrates the mind within everything else, and actually has two separate aspects of the mind, as it were, or even three. So it's got the component of the emotions, so the things that you're feeling, the thoughts that come to you. Some people were talking about those kind of subconscious thoughts, and that is where you see some of the work being done, some of the heavy lifting, I suppose, behind CBT is done in that component. Then there's the behavior that is caused by these thoughts and emotions, and physical reactions to these thoughts and emotions. Those are different depending on the emotion and what's happening. And the point of showing you this diagram is that it shows that they all, in the CBT way of understanding this thing, they all influence one another. So for example, if you have an emotion, you have, say, anxiety, it usually comes with a thought. So the emotion might be the thing that happens first, and then it says, why am I feeling this anxiety? And then some kind of an explanation pops into your head. It might be, oh, because I'm not able to sort of leave this situation. I feel trapped. For example, that might be the thought, I feel trapped. So I'm feeling anxious because I feel trapped. This all happens so quick that you don't even realize it's happening. And that leads you to maybe some behavior. And the behavior might be, okay, I need to get out of here. So I'm going to do things to try and escape this situation because the thought is I'm feeling trapped. So my behavior is going to be about getting out. And then there might be some physical reactions that come with it, which might be my heart is racing, I have sweat, I've got pins and needles in my hands, I'm having difficulty breathing, I feel like I'm going to collapse. And then maybe new thoughts, because the physical sensations have occurred, then you might be getting new thoughts. Oh my God, you know, this feels like I'm having a heart attack. I feel like I'm dying. So again, those new thoughts may influence some new emotions there. So you feel even more anxious because this thought that you might be dying. And your behavior, maybe you feel like you're going to collapse, so you sit down and you lie down, and you feel like you're going to pass out, and you become very agitated in your behavior. So as you can see, it's not that it stays the same, but it's all these components seem to be all the time influencing one another. Now, the model tells us that this happens in a context. So there's a situation surrounding this that kind of has triggered this cascade of emotions, thoughts, behaviors, and physical reactions. So that situation is very specific to the person, and is the thing that we deal with when we're dealing with, we're trying to understand the situation, how it triggers whatever reaction in you, and what that means, and how it influences all these things. So the situation might be something like, I'm in public transport and it's very crowded. Or the situation is, I've just got a letter from HMRC and I don't know what's in it. That might trigger the reaction. Or the situation might be, my boss has ignored me this morning, I think I'm in trouble. Or the situation might be, you present a piece of work and you don't feel anybody's paid, or you don't get any feedback, so you feel it's wrong. So the situation is presenting a piece of work, delivering a piece of work, and not perceiving as if you're not receiving feedback, and that makes you feel bad about yourself, for example. That's how that works. So there's a situation that triggers this cascade. It can start, it usually tends to start with either the emotion component, so the first thing that happens is an emotion, or maybe a thought. Sometimes it's kind of almost both at the same time. Now, when you're intervening, when you're using CBT, it's actually very hard to get to the emotions directly. That's the key thing. So we do want to get to the emotions. Why? Because they are the things that are going to be very unpleasant for us. So the emotions are the things that actually trigger the distress in us. But they are the things that it's not easy to control directly. However, we can do something about the thoughts if we're able to do some of the exercises that you were talking about in the chat before. So if we're able to identify those thoughts, we might be able to do something about those thoughts. That's an important point of intervention. And by diffusing those thoughts, by changing them or making them, you're not trying to think positively, it's not that. Is you're trying to think more accurately, because what happens is that if you interrogate those thoughts, they tend to be inaccurate and exaggerated. That's kind of the point. So we can do something about making those thoughts more accurate, more in keeping with reality. We can do something about the behavior, because the behavior might be sustaining the cascade. How does this happen? Imagine that I'm in that situation that I was saying before about feeling very anxious when I go into public transport. So I immediately realize when I do the behavior of leaving the situation, when I avoid it, that's my behavior, I feel immediately better because I'm not confronting the situation. And that reinforces my behavior of continuing to avoid the situation altogether. So what that means is that the next time I confront it, the emotions are going to be stronger and the thoughts are going to be stronger. So it's going to motivate me even stronger for avoiding that situation altogether. So you can intervene at the point of behavior by doing the behavior, the opposite of what the thoughts and your emotions want you to do. So you want to seek out that exposure, because we know that exposure will eventually challenge those thoughts and extinguish those emotions that are unpleasant and unhelpful. And the physical component, we can also intervene there, particularly in the case of when the physical component is about anxiety and this extreme unpleasant state of arousal with the heart the fast breathing, the heart pacing, all of these, the feeling like it's tied around your neck, all of these things are happening. That you can do something about that by using relaxation techniques, and that can actually diffuse the whole situation and enable you, for example, to then work on the thoughts or work on the behavior. So you can intervene at all those 3 points. It's harder to intervene at the point of the emotion. The emotion, you change the emotion by changing the other components. So when we're saying it's all about thoughts, it's kind of not. It takes into account this physical component, takes into account this behavioral component as well. Thoughts are very important, but are not the only thing. So CBT doesn't deal with diagnosis, it deals with this kind of a formulation. We've got the situation, it triggers this thing, and we have to diffuse this problem by examining, interrogating these components and looking at it. So that's why it's applicable to areas outside of treating a condition, because it doesn't deal with conditions, it deals with a formulation of a situation. So the emotions don't need to be very intense. They need to just be troublesome enough to cause you a problem, to be something that you want to change about, you know, they are unpleasant enough to be causing you a problem without necessarily being a diagnosis of anything. One example might be giving a presentation and you feel anxious. Do you have an anxiety disorder because you feel anxious when giving a presentation? Not at all, but you may be wanting to change that. Or you may be wanting yourself to sort of not jump to conclusions so quickly. For example, a classic example that I give is, imagine that you're walking down the street and you encounter a friend and the friend does not acknowledge you. You say hello, you wave hello, and they don't acknowledge you at all. They just walk on right by. And then, so one example might be that, oh, you know, how rude. How rude is my friend? They didn't even acknowledge me. You know, that's not a very good friend. The next time I talk to them, I'm really going to sort of tell them that is not on and is inappropriate, and they should be sort of much more polite, and what is this all about? So you might be feeling, so the thoughts are my friend is very rude, and why are they like that? Why are they treating me so poorly? Those might be the thoughts. The emotions might be, I'm angry with them for treating me like this. I don't deserve it. And the behavior might be that the next opportunity you take, you're going to tell them, and you're going to initiate that contact with your friend by you know, calling them out, and that might shock them because maybe what you assume was going on is not what is going on. That's kind of the point. Same situation. Friend walks right on by. You've waved. They don't acknowledge you. You think, oh, I made them angry, or they you know, I've done something to cause this problem. It's my fault. So I'm going to feel bad about myself. What is it that I've done? I need to apologize. Or I can't even call them because I don't know what I've done wrong. It's probably terrible. I'm going to be losing this friend. Or that, you know, you actually avoid contact with your friend because you feel that you've annoyed them, or that you've angered them. These are extreme examples, but it's just to illustrate how this may happen. The situation is exactly the same. The thoughts were different. The emotions were different as a result. The behavior was different as a result, and maybe the physical reactions are different also as a result. When in reality, if you think about it, there's other explanations. So this is what CBT may enable you to do is, okay, they didn't wave at me, I don't know why, and just be comfortable with that. And then you take a next step is, okay, I don't know why, so what is it that I need to do about this to find out what's going on? Do I need to just tell them, oh, you know, I saw you the other day, you didn't see me, and they say, oh, I never noticed you because I was preoccupied with whatever, or I was in a hurry and I really needed to get, or I was in a bad situation myself and I couldn't, you know, I didn't feel like I could talk to you, say hello to you, or whatever. So there might be a million other explanations except for the one that popped right into your head that needed to be examined. This is exactly what you were saying. But the behavioral component of it is not just about the thoughts, it's about the behavioral component of it, which is also, I'm going to approach my friend and actually figure out what actually happened, rather than just assume what happened. That's kind of the point. So with that, I'm talking about this important concept in CBT, which is cognitive errors. Cognitive errors are the way those thoughts present themselves have errors in them. That means that they are inaccurate thoughts for the situation, okay? So how does that work? From the example that I just gave, first thought that pops into my head, my friend is being rude to me, okay? Now, what are the facts that support that? From what you've known, so they just walked on right by. So the fact is that they walked on by. Okay, does that support that they are angry with you? Or is there anything that this could, that could be explained, that could explain this behavior? So what supports that? What is against that? Against that is, yesterday I had a perfectly good conversation with them and they weren't angry at all. Or sometimes, you realize that sometimes actually your friend is very distracted and won't see people, around them because they are thinking of, they're in their own little world. So those are the evidence against your initial thoughts. And then you're thinking, okay, so my initial thought, which is they're being rude and they're ignoring me on purpose, may be inaccurate because there may be other explanations here for what's going on. So why do I need to feel angry now with my friend for being rude when I don't even know if they've been rude? So there's no, if you're able to do that exercise in the moment, so first thought pops into your head, you identify it, and you say, actually, is that true? And then you don't feel angry anymore with your friend. You say, okay, I don't know what happened. They could be being rude. That is still a possibility, but it's not the only possibility. There's other possibilities. So until I find out with my behavior, I don't know how to really react here. And I might be jumping to conclusions and doing things that I don't want to do. But the initial thought is always very black and white, and it presents itself as reality. That's the cognitive error. It's absolute. Is everybody hates me, or I always disappoint, or this is going to go terribly wrong. Things like that. So this may go terribly wrong, or this could go terribly wrong, but in the past I've done it, and I've done it better, and I've done it well, so it's been fine. No, it's nothing like that. It's always, this is going to go awful. My boss is going to fire me. It's like that. So it contains an error because if you look at the facts, there's not enough to support it. So basically it's mistaken. The thought is mistaken. It's realizing that. Those are the cognitive errors. The cognitive errors are the jumping to conclusions, the black and white thinking. It is like this, and actually that is reality without actually ever questioning it. That's kind of what it is. There's another concept that is very important in CBT, which are hot thoughts. So when you get a thought, when you get a situation and the emotions and everything else, there'll be a few thoughts that pop into your head. One, when you write them down, when you look at them, one is actually doing the heaviest lifting. The others are not causing that emotion so intensely, are peripheral to it. So when you interrogate those thoughts, you look at the one that is actually doing most of the pushing you to feel in a particular way. Like, I've disappointed my friend. That's the one that's making you feel sad, or whatever. So which one is the one that is causing the emotion that most troubles you? That is the hot thought. Why is that important to identify? Because that's the one that we need to sort of interrogate and work with. And then look at the behavior, look at the other components that we talked about. And then there's another concept, very important in CBT, which is core beliefs. So these thoughts are normally sometimes come in the form of a question, what's going to happen next? And you don't even know. There's like a dread. Like, I was talking to one of my patients recently, and they were like talking about something that happened at work. A manager that was on long-term leave came back from work, and my patient was thinking, okay, so I'm going to be demoted because the manager is back, and all of these things that I'm doing, they're going to be taken away from me, So there was nothing to support that. There was nothing there. It was, that was the hot thought. The hot thought there was, this is all going to be taken away from me. But the core belief would be, why is she thinking that this is going to be taken away from her? What is the belief that prompts that thought to happen automatically? That requires exploration with the therapist and self-interrogation. So why is it that I assume? So when I could assume a number of things, so when you actually look at the situation, there could be a number of outcomes. Why is that one the one that pops in? I'm going to be demoted. That's not a core belief, because the core beliefs are usually I am statements. So I'm going to get demoted because I am not worthy of this post. I'm worthless. Therefore, nobody could consider me to keep me indisposed. So that the core belief looks like an I am statement, or the world is, or the people are. So it's like an absolute statement about the world, or the people, or yourself. And it's the thing that seems to be driving these automatic thoughts. That's the core belief, and that's what you explore in the therapy. Okay.
I think, yeah, sorry. Here, I think it's good to mention that those core beliefs are sometimes based on early experiences. So if you look,
Yes,
for example,
absolutely.
back to childhood experiences that your parents told you, or like rejected you, or just criticized you, based on those experiences, you build those core beliefs in the future, and they are then the result of those, for example, childhood experiences. So it can start really early on that you build those beliefs, and they rule then your kind of assumptions and thoughts and behaviors in the end. So yeah, I think here, just in short, again, it's not the situation which kind of makes us behave in a certain way. It's the way we interpret the situation. So it's the way how we build based on our core beliefs, and the way we just think about the situation, but not the situation itself.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of the model, and it's all about making those thoughts more accurate, and then interrogating that core belief. And actually, you do the same process with the core belief once you've identified it. You know, I am worthless. Is that true? What is the evidence? You know, you would do a similar process. It's more tricky with the core belief because it's very deeply ingrained. Because as Johanna's saying, it usually comes from an early experience. That's why it's not. You know, CBT is focused on the here and now, but you do interrogate what's happened before, because when you're exploring core beliefs, it usually is rooted in an early experience that made you think about the world or yourself or other people in a particular way. So that's quite important. Okay, so that's all interesting, but how does it apply to people's lives? I don't know if we have another poll that we need to do, or
yeah, we had one for the model, but maybe we do it in the end as like a test of people.
okay. Okay. There's something there in the questions. I think we'll leave them for the end, unless you want to bring them on at any particular point, Johanna.
No, let's do them in the end. That's good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just get rid of that. Okay. So I've told you we've spoken about the model and how it works and why it's been designed that way. And how practical it is in many ways. So how does it apply this to your life when you don't have any symptoms or any significant symptoms, any symptoms that would perhaps attract a diagnosis of any sort? The skills are very useful in themselves because with this model, I think it enables you to understand your mind better, even if you don't have any terribly distressing thoughts or emotions. Just knowing that this happens, that you're jumping to conclusions many times just because you have certain assumptions about the world, is actually very useful, and may stop you and say, well, actually, this, I've always assumed this because maybe this is what I was taught. Is this true? You know, it enables you to see, to question those things and see how useful those concepts are to you in your day-to-day life. So sometimes one of the key things for me is that it enables you to acknowledge that most of the time you don't know, and to be comfortable with that. Right? I think that's an important lesson. So most of the time you think you have an answer in your head that pops in, because you know we human beings seem to hate uncertainty. So uncertainty gets coded as risk. It's very hard not to know because that is perceived as risk by us. So therefore, any answer is more comfortable than I don't know. And most of the times, unfortunately, the real answer is I don't know yet, or I may never know. That's the other possibility. So by thinking this way, by thinking and using the techniques that are associated with CBT, you're able to stop yourself and say, actually, I don't know. And that's okay. That's okay. So then you tell yourself, this answer that I have, everybody, I am the life of the, I don't know, whatever belief you have about something that you're going to then interrogate. I'm going to say, actually, I don't know that this is true, whatever it is. How do I go about figuring out what is true? That is another thing that you do. So if it is interesting to you, if you say, okay, I've actually acted like this might not be the best, most useful way to act based on these beliefs, based on these thoughts. Can I interrogate them? Can I do something? Can I do some experiment? Which is a very, very much at the core of CBT, doing these experiments that enables me to find out what I don't know. Typical example of that, this lady that not typical example, a recent example for me, this lady that was assuming these things that her boss was going to do because this new other manager had come back from leave, from long-term sick leave. Why don't you go and talk to your direct the person that manages you directly and talk to them through it? That will enable you to find out really what is happening instead of assuming that you're going to be automatically demoted, which is what, and you're acting as if you're already demoted and you're experiencing the emotions that are concordant with already being demoted. So by doing that, by making you comfortable with uncertainty, giving you ways to reduce your uncertainty and then being able to act once the uncertainty is reduced, you save yourself unnecessary distress, because before you know, there's no reason that you should feel in a particular way. Now, this is very easy for me to say, but if you do practice the skill, you get to that point. You say, oh, I'm reacting before I know. Why do I need to feel distress now when I don't know? It could be all very good. So uncertainty, in my mind, goes on to risk, but it's not true. So why am I feeling like that prematurely? What do I need to do to reduce that uncertainty, to figure out what is actually going on, and then act based on that? In everybody's experience, I submit to you that once you're in the situation, it's never as bad as our imagination plays it out. What tends to very, very exceedingly rarely be as bad as our imagination plays it out. So actually, once I talked to this lady, she was like, oh yeah, because I'm sure that some of the skills, some of the tasks I'm still going to do because I've been good, I've been getting good reviews. So in one way or another, we're going to find a way to do this. It's very likely, it's more likely than not. And I can interrogate this. And then she was generating these things, and actually the emotions were disappearing because they were necessary. The thought was inaccurate. It hadn't happened. That was not real. So why was she reacting in that particular way when she didn't need to yet? There might be an appropriate time to feel anxious or worried or angry, right? But it's not that time. It's not before it happens. It's when it happens. Those emotions that happen before it happens are useless. The emotions that happen during the time are quite useful. They can be quite helpful. So that's, it saves you unnecessary distress. That's one thing that is helpful in life in general. And it can help you act in a way less likely to cause regret later. Why? Because you haven't acted on your first assumption, and then you found out after the fact that you were wrong about it. So you assumed that your friend was angry, so you got angry back at them. And the first time you saw them, you were a bit short. Okay? And then you realize that your friend had been going through a horrible, horrible time, and that's the reason they didn't say hello to you on the street or whatever happened. Okay, it's not what you assume, is something entirely different, nothing to do with you. And now you feel bad, and now you feel that you actually hurt the relationship with your friend for no good reason. Whereas if you'd been able to say, oh, it might be that they're being rude, or it might be a million other things. Let me stop, find out first, and then act. Then you don't need to regret that line that you took initially. That's why That's why when practiced, when you really get the skill, it feels a bit like a superpower. It's a, you know, of course it's not a superpower, but you know, it's a skill that gives you options in the moment. That's how it applies to your life. And that's why that behavioral component is so important, I feel.
Yeah, no, there's another thing, like you might heard about the self-fulfilling prophecy. So that if
Very good point.
yeah, but if we think about like something, I can't do it or I can do it. So if I think back, like for example, if you had to do a test, if you think I can't do it, you will make a worse score. So this is the thing with the self-fulfilling prophecy. So the thoughts influence how you behave and how you perform, and there it comes in again, like being really helpful that you can identify this unhelpful thought which will influence your performance later on. So that is again like the superpower which helps us to perform better, because we know this is an unhelpful thought which will only decrease our performance, for example.
Absolutely, yeah. So it's not at all helpful. So I'll give you a personal example just to illustrate this thing. So I used to be terrible when driving. I used to be like get really angry. In particular, for some reason, there was a period of time where I was getting. So people were driving into the back of my car. It happened like I'd say 3 times in like 18 months plus. So the last time it happened, I got really, really cross with the person behind me in the moment. So I was just driving, I stopped for traffic, and somebody drove into the back of my car. Immediately, the first emotion was I was very angry, extremely angry. And then, you know, the thought was, oh, they're an idiot. What are they doing? They're not paying attention. Why me? You know, it seems like they're doing it on purpose because this was like the 3rd time. So, you know, quite irrational thoughts that pop into your head in the moment. Because I'm alert to having an unhealthy emotion, the anger, unwarranted anger, I was like, what's going on here? So I managed to stop that and sort of actually interrogate, okay, so are they really an idiot, or could there be other things? Is this the real explanation? What are the facts? The facts is that I've been hit. That's all the facts that I know. I don't know why at this point in time. All the facts I know is somebody's driven in the back of my car. That's it. So what is there to be angry about that? You know, because the explanation might be that they are running really late and they didn't sleep at all last night because they have a very ill person in their house that they need to attend all night, and they're going to get them I don't know, some medicine or something, and that's what happened. So I don't know, there could be a million things going on with this other person that's driven into the back of my car. So is actually, and then the next thought that occurred to me is actually being angry the most useful thing here? Is that going to get us anywhere? You know, what is the best way of behaving in this situation? So by just being able to stop, think about those alternatives, look at what the evidence that I have is and isn't, my emotion immediately dissipated. It took about 30 seconds. And then by the time the person behind me came around to talk to me, I was calm already. They were apologizing, and I said, that's fine, no worries. And we were able to sort of get on and finish the thing with minimum drama. And I felt very happy that I'd been able to act in the way that I wanted to act. I wanted to be polite, I wanted to be civil, and I wanted to get the things that I needed to do done, like taking the pictures and making the right, you know, doing the right things to protect me, of course, but, you know, in a civil way. I didn't need to be angry or anything. And actually that got us very well. Collaboration from both of us, no problem at all. So I was quite happy to have been able to diffuse the anger in such a short time. So that's kind of what I mean. So it helps you. Does it help you extinguish these emotions? No, they still happen, like mine happen, but they're less intense, they're shorter, and they're less likely to take over your own behavior. You think, okay, so instead of shouting here, what is the most useful behavior for me to take? You know, do I need to find out what's going on with them? Not really. That's not going to get me, you know, that's fine. You know, and there could be a million things, but that's not the thing. The thing that I need to do is to make sure that I get the details and I do the right things without feeling nervous or flustered and without being rude, right? So it's less likely to take your behavior, gives you those choices. gives you discomfort with being less certain, but also helps you see the larger picture. For example, some of the things that we do, I'm very worried to go into the office because of COVID, for example. And then you say, okay, so I'm going to make myself safe, right? So you look at your safety behavior. What is reasonable to do? What is unreasonable to do? Because when you're trying to make uncertainty go away, so if I don't want ever to be infected by this thing, maybe I should live in a bubble where, you know, and that's impossible for any viruses to get at me, for example, if that's what I'm worried about. So if I live in a bubble completely isolated and sterile, no viruses are going to get at me. But I pay a price for that safety, right? So every time you try to do something to reduce risk or reduce perceived risk in particular, you pay a price, and the price might be higher than the risk. Has its own risk, has its own risks. So by putting myself into a sterile bubble, I am going to lose many things, definitely. So it puts me at risk of losing many things, which we never take into account when we feeling anxious about something and taking these perhaps sometimes extreme precautions. So because uncertainty can never be completely eliminated, you need to sort of look at how much you're avoiding and what is your safety behavior there? Is it appropriate or inappropriate? There's always going to be some residual uncertainty, and with that we need to cope, right? So the other thing that it does, it helps you think more accurately and helps you be more pragmatic. Imagine that the thought, eventually when you find out, the case of the patient that I was telling you about, she's worried about what her boss is going to do about this manager coming back. Imagine that, yes, it is going to be a demotion. You can prepare for that. You can choose to act in your best interest, even in that situation. You don't know yet, so the thought wasn't accurate, but if that happens, so you can imagine the worst case scenario in a very calm way and plan for it, which if you're just reacting to this thought and your attention is being captured by it, is very hard to do. It's very hard to act in your best interest in those circumstances. So, what can I do about it? Question number one, how can I cope with the situation if it turns out to be, it's never as bad as one imagines, but turns out to be like one imagines. Why does it affect me beyond the situation specifically? Why does it need to take over all my life? Maybe this is just an aspect. Why is it taking over everything? And is it useful to be stuck by thinking this thing, oh, my boss is terrible? Is that getting me anywhere? This recurring thought, is it helpful in any way? Is it pushing us forward to get our goals? It's not. So it enables you to do that analysis and say, this is useless. I need to do something that is more useful for me.
There's a question. Do you recommend using ABC acronym to focus your thoughts in the moment?
ABC?
Yeah.
I'm not sure what they mean by that.
I don't know. Maybe you can clarify, Michelle.
Yeah, if you want to clarify it, and we can talk about it.
There's another question. What if the friend is also going through similar thoughts, such as, why is my friend looking at me all the time and keeps wanting to talk to me?
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So there could be a million things going on there. One of the other cognitive errors that we commonly encounter is mind reading. This is an important one. So you automatically assume that you know what's in the other person's head, and you don't. So yeah, they could be thinking all kinds of things, but you don't know. So again, what are the facts? The facts are they behave in this way, and we don't know why. So that is the uncertainty. Can we reduce it? Is it useful to reduce it? What do we do about it? Yeah, that's the thing. So there could be a million things in your friend's head.
Yeah. So there's a clarification. So A for activating event, B for beliefs, and C for consequences.
Yeah, I mean that is more used in when you're designing a behavioral plan for somebody. When you're doing what's called a functional analysis. So that is usually a diary that is kept. So what are the trigger, the antecedents, the A, what's going on before this happens, which is kind of equivalent to the situation. What is it that is done? What happens? That's the B, the behavior, and C, what are the consequences? So sometimes you do that when you're looking at maybe maladaptive behavior in some kind of context and you want to extinguish it. So you want to sort of realize whether something is being reinforced inadvertently. Like I was saying, so if the antecedents in this example, there's a very crowded place, and I feel, the ABC doesn't concern itself with cognitions or anything like that. It's just purely what you observe. That's why it's usually used for functional analysis from a third person's point of view, from an assessor's point of view. That's how it's used. So what are the antecedents? This person is going into a crowd. What is the behavior? They're avoiding it. What are the consequences? They feel better. So we know that the avoiding the situation is reinforcing that behavior and is going to continue and get worse. So that's how it tends to be used, that ABC formulation, more for a functional analysis. It can be applied to oneself, absolutely. But from a first person point of view, you have a bit more. You have access to more. You have access to the actual thoughts, which you don't have when you're just doing an ABC from the outside. So the ABC from the outside does not take into account thoughts because you can't. So you can do a little bit better in identifying those. So you have to be very alert, and it requires practice of the unhealthy emotion, which is the thing that you tend to be aware of first, and then look at what thoughts are flowing around that you hadn't identified at first because you've taken them for granted. They're so automatic that you don't even see them. This is what I'm going to talk about now, so hopefully that will address it. So obviously CBT is the most successful best evidenced form of therapy to date. I think this is because it's easy to understand. It's taken about an hour to explain it. I think most people will very easily grasp the concept. It's easy to start practicing, even yourself. That's why it's good. It doesn't take long to learn the basics. You can learn them in an hour and take it from there. It can be applied to almost any situation, like we've shown. And as we said, is more successful as prevention than it is as therapy. So how does it work? So you start with this unhealthy emotion. So I suppose this addresses the question. So you feel an unhealthy emotion, and you've trained yourself because of practice, right, to recognize this. That's kind of the first step. Oh, I am feeling an emotion that is unhealthy, is distressing. It's going to do things here that I may not want. Okay, so you realize that your attention at this moment is being captured by an unhelpful automatic thought, and this is until you practice it, this is sometimes even invisible to you. With practice, it becomes visible. The thought is presenting itself as the truth. That's the problem. Okay. Normally, by this stage, you would have already taken action. So there's an unhealthy emotion situation. If it's an unhealthy emotion, probably the wrong action. So this mechanism is actually useful. If the emotion is healthy, we may be taking appropriate quick action. So it's healthy. I am very scared because a bus is going to run me over, and I react in the moment to get out of the way. Very useful. So I avoided, my behavior was to avoid. I had the palpitations, I had everything there. The cognition was, this bus is going to run me over. It was accurate. I get out of the way. Perfect. Nothing to do there. It's when it's unhealthy, it's when it's unhelpful that we need to sort of be paying attention. So instead, you've perceived this unhealthy emotion, you perceive this unhelpful thought, you stop and think, okay, is this accurate? What is the evidence for this thing? Okay, the evidence that we have may be very limited. The fact is somebody drove into the back of my car. That's all the facts. Nothing else is a fact. Okay, so you also figure out what is the evidence for, what is the evidence against. And this is hard for people. The evidence against might be the lady that I was talking about before. My boss is usually very understanding. My boss usually is a good advocate for me. So I have some evidence that my boss is going to be looking out for me, that I was ignoring the first time the thought popped into my head. This is true. It's a true case that I'm dealing with. she, after prompting, came up with those things herself. This has happened before. So what is the evidence against? Very, very important, very hard to do sometimes. Now you know how accurate the initial thought is in light of the evidence. You can reframe it. So sometimes this may happen, but other things may happen. So you have a more accurate thing that isn't black and white, that isn't certain, that is, there's some uncertainty in there. And then once you've got that, you can decide what to do. Do I really care for, what is the outcomes of here that I care about? So these are all these scenarios. Which ones do I care? How can I influence it? How do I reduce this uncertainty? And then once I reduce the uncertainty, I can act according to what I find out. One of the possible outcomes is actually a useful exercise to think of the worst possible outcome. I did this with another patient recently. She was very worried about moving house, like panicking over moving house. And then we discussed, okay, what is the worst possible outcome of this moving house scenario? That I leave something behind. Okay, so then what? Well, the person that is come in can, is not going to be. So she couldn't think of this big threatening thing that she was thinking of. There was nothing there, and she was quite distressed about it. And now you finally can act. Is equally applicable is the emotion is rejection or dread or rage. This is the process that you follow, and that's why it's applicable to many. So it's been applicable to anxiety, to depression, to all forms of things. The key here and the practice, the main thing, is to be highly tuned to those unhealthy emotions and unhelpful thoughts. So then you can do the rest of the exercise. I'm not saying the rest of the exercise is easy, but that is the most difficult component, is finding the emotions, identifying the thoughts. And that's why that is the superpower, I think. Being able to sort of stop, think, and then act. That's it. I think with that, we'll open it up for questions.
Yeah, should we just do the last poll questions? So
yeah, go for it.
Yeah. I think you have to do them again.
Oh, of course, sorry.
So only 2 questions.
Okay.
We had this one.
So CBT is only, okay, so hold on. How do I go to the next one? Oh, here we go. Sorry. I found out how to do it.
Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah, so this is good for a recap, isn't it? So
yeah.
what are the elements of it that we've been talking about?
Looks good so far. Very good. A few more responses. We have 70% now.
Some people are shy, but I'm sure you know it, actually.
Yes.
You know it. Anyway, I think we'll end it there.
Yeah, that's fine.
So very well done. And so, obviously it's emotions, thoughts, behavior, and physical reactions, absolutely, as you said. And okay, so how do I, and then I have to go for the next one.
Yeah.
So do you think will be a helpful skill for you to gain? Okay, so the majority think yes. Some of you want to try it first, which makes perfect sense.
Yeah, very good. Okay, that's interesting to see. Nice.
Yeah, no, and the ones that are saying maybe I have to try it first are already applying it because they want to reduce their uncertainty before making a choice. Very good. So I mean that's the quick recap. Thank you for the answers to the questions. Any other questions that you want to sort of ask us? Just go ahead now, and we'll take some questions, I think.
So there's a question about a sleep disorder. Which one is better, hypnotherapy or CBT?
For a sleep disorder, the one that has the most evidence is actually CBT for insomnia. And it has more evidence behind it than sleeping tablets. It's more effective than sleeping tablets. And I mean, sleeping tablets, the problem is that they're very poor technology, and they basically disrupt sleep architecture. So you don't gain the benefits that from a good night's sleep, from a natural night's sleep. Unfortunately, the technology is not there yet. But with CBT for insomnia is the most effective technique, bar none. That's what the evidence shows.
Mm-hmm. Can you recommend any online resources to get a handle on CBT? Well,
I recommend our app has a full CBT. I mean, obviously, has a full CBT course in it. So I recommend following it. It is transdiagnostic, and it applies it from this point of view of you're going to use it as a skill for many, many things. So it has that impetus or emphasis on getting the basic skills and then practicing in your own case for your own specific needs without assuming any particular situation or diagnosis. So that's why that's why I recommend it. All the courses have a particular condition in mind. This one is transdiagnostic. It's generic, and it can be applied to any situation. Yeah.
Yeah, and I believe most of you have access to the app through your employer, so maybe it's worth checking any well-being website or asking HR for the access code. So you should all have access to the app. So also, would CBT help someone who worries about everything? This is probably what is affecting sleep patterns.
It will, yeah. So that might be, without putting a label on it, something like anxiety, which is generalized. I'm not going to say generalized anxiety disorder because it might not be, and it doesn't really matter. So is this constant feeling of dread that every now and again kind of anchors itself on something that is happening in the moment, but it's a generalized feeling of dread? Yes, it is helpful. Actually, even though CBT was originally developed for depression, what has been most successful is with anxiety in particular. So yes, even though you might feel that it's very hard to get a handle on it, there probably is some kind of core belief that triggers anxiety in all kinds of different situations. And that's the thing. So it might require to do the core belief exploration. Yes. So it might be a little bit more length, it might take more time than somebody who doesn't have these symptoms and is easier to get to the automatic thoughts. And that's kind of enough. It might require that core belief exploration, but having done that, it's likely to be successful, to be honest. Yeah.
When you're in a heightened state of emotion, it's not easy to remain logical. And I think this is, again, what we mentioned before. Yes. This is a practice.
Absolutely true.
Yeah, obviously, it's nothing you learn overnight. So you have to practice it a lot. And yeah, after practice, you will learn to have this like stop and think moment, but it's nothing you will have overnight. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, the way I answer that is, I mean, to play the piano, okay, all you have to do is hit the right key at the right time. That's it. I've given you a full explanation of how to play the piano. Can everybody in the audience now play the piano? No. What you require is the practice. So I've described what the skill gives you, which is the ability to do these things. But by me telling you, that's not the thing. You need to actually practice this over and over again until it becomes automatic. As automatic as driving your car, writing and reading. So reading at one stage, it was extremely difficult, right? So you couldn't read, and it was really effortful. And now you can't help but read. So you see something written, and you will read it automatically without even you wanting. So that's kind of the thing. It requires this effort, and it requires this practice, but you are able to get there. That's the point. Mm-hmm. Yeah, mood juice from NHS Scotland. Let's answer that. Actually, that is a very good point. And yes, it's actually a very, very good resource, to be honest. Mood juice contains like a self-help booklet for CBT, and it has different kinds of CBT. It's very diagnostic-led. So there's one for depression, one for anxiety, but it's actually very well put together. The only difference there is that they don't have one which is just for prevention and just for everyday life as a generic skill. It usually does target something.
Great.
I think we're done for questions. Thank you all very much. And
you.
yeah, I hope that was useful. Thanks for participating, and we'll see you on another one of these.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you. Bye. Take care.